This is the Walking Liberty half dollar. It's a 50-cent silver piece and it was issued by the United States Mint from 1916 to 1947. It was designed by Adolf Alexander Weinman, and he, like many other men of the time, wanted the nation's most beautiful woman to pose for him so that the coin could be struck with the most beautiful woman on it. The woman who you see on this coin is named Audrey Munson, and she's considered to be America's first ever supermodel. Her career was so prolific, any statue made during the turn of the century was her. Any statue of Lady Liberty, any statue of a beautiful woman, it was her. Nobody till that time had ever achieved that much stardom, and this video is all about her story. Audrey Munson was born in Rochester, New York on June 8, 1891. Her parents' relationship was tumultuous. They divorced when she was 8 years old, and she remained with her mom for the rest of her childhood. Although she was born in Rochester, New York, she spent most of her childhood in Providence, Rhode Island. As Audrey grew up, she had an affinity for singing, dancing, and acting, and at the age of 17, she moved back to New York to become a chorus singer and actress. She worked very hard to get onto Broadway, and that gave her acting, performance, and modeling career the spark that it needed. Many people were enamored with Audrey Munson's physique. One thing in particular that stuck out was her height. She was taller than the average woman, making her best fit for modeling. While window shopping in a department store with her mother, she would be spotted by a famous photographer named Felix Benedict Herzog, who asked her to pose for him in his studio in the Lincoln Arcade building on Broadway Street. She was then introduced to multiple renowned artists, specifically sculptors. And as a result, it wouldn't be too long before she would pose for her first sculpture. It was called the Three Graces, and it was unveiled in the new Grand Ballroom at the Hotel Astor in Times Square. And for the next decade, Audrey Munson was the top choice for American sculptors. Her likeness and what she portrayed herself as became one. She was seen as Lady Liberty. She was the female embodiment of the nation, and if anybody wanted to depict that, she was the model. There was no other choice. And by 1915, she was so well established that she became Alexander Sterling's model of choice. When he was commissioned by the Panama Pacific International Exposition, he had to contact Audrey Munson. There was simply no other model in the nation that had the recognition and the beauty that Audrey Munson had. And once the exposition was complete and ready for the public, 3/5 of the sculptures shown there were her. In between modeling commissions, she was a film actress. She starred in nearly a dozen films, and every single one of them boosted her notoriety. But with each film, her purity was compromised. Directors, writers, and Audrey herself were interested in a more sexual, more adult persona for her on the screen, and many people took note of that. Once Audrey became more and more famous for showing more and more of her body, her mental health and her reputation began to decline. On January 27, 1919, Audrey Munson wrote a rambling letter to the US State Department declaring that her movie career had been sabotaged by a pro-German company. The letter was incoherent, and it was obvious that her mental health was declining rapidly. It didn't help that when she was moving from place to place, she ended up living in a boarding house with her mother and a man who killed his wife to get with her. She wasn't interested in a relationship with this older man, but his actions definitely left a mark, so much so that she would make an attempt on her life, and this action marked the end of her 10-year-long career. People were vehement about not letting her be a model anymore. People were adamant about not watching her films. People shared the opinion that her life and her decisions, her choices, were incongruent with her persona and her status. She was Lady Liberty. She was Miss Manhattan. People had expectations for her to be a pure, positive, beautiful female avatar of the American nation, but she wasn't meeting those expectations. She was mentally ill, suicidal, and traumatized. Many smear articles were written about her on newspapers, many lies were spread, and it just became too much. Her mother was able to afford extensive medical treatment for her daughter, and Audrey Munson was committed to a mental asylum. She would remain there for 65 years. She had no friends, she had no visitors, and no one knew that she was there. In the late 70s to early 80s, she was approached by an autobiographer who was interested in her story, but that's it. After he left, no one else came to visit her. And on February 20th, 1996, she died at the age of 104. Many people for many decades did not know her story. They only knew of her statues, her photos, her movies, her music. Her body, her face was so recognizable, yet her personal life and her personal story was unknown. Nobody was really interested in her as a person, but what she presented herself as. And only recently her story has been shared, and many people can point parallels between her life and others who share that superstar fandom. She was the test case. She was the first. And unfortunately, for as enthusiastic as the American public were willing to put her on a pedestal, they were just as enthusiastic in the act of tearing her down.